Welcome back to The Other Side. Tonight, we're not looking at one mystery, we're pulling back the curtain on the entire nature of reality. I've collected 4 of our darkest deep dives into a single uninterrupted journey for you to drift off to. We'll start with secrets your government has been actively trying to hide, before moving into the silent, terrifying void of space and the dead internet. From there, we'll dig up forbidden history of civilizations that shouldn't exist. And finally, we'll confront the ultimate question. Is any of this real, or are we just living in a simulation? Get comfortable, and let's step into the other side. MKUltra, the mind control experiments. We begin in the early 1950s. The Second World War is over, but the Cold War is just beginning. Intelligence agencies in the United States are obsessed with one question. Could a human mind be broken down, reassembled, and controlled? From that fear, a program was born, and it was called MKUltra. On paper, it was a research project meant to explore the limits of human consciousness. In practice, it became a sprawling network of secret experiments, many of them done without consent, and almost all of them hidden from the public eye. Doctors, scientists, and psychologists were recruited. Money was funneled into front organizations, fake foundations, and quiet contracts. Ordinary people became test subjects without ever knowing. Prisoners, psychiatric patients, even unsuspecting civilians who thought they were just having a drink at a bar. The drug of choice was LSD. Researchers believed that if they could push the mind far enough, past comfort, past coherence, they might discover a way to erase memories, to implant new ones, or to create a blank slate which could be written on like a page. There are stories of agents slipping LSD into drinks of their colleagues at office parties, just to watch what happened. There are accounts of people waking up in strange rooms, strapped to beds with bright lights above them, and unfamiliar faces taking notes at the edge of the frame. Some experiments combine drugs with sensory deprivation, endless hours in dark, silent rooms. Others use hypnosis, repetitive phrases, or extreme stress, all in the name of breaking down the walls of the mind. Most of the official documents were ordered to be destroyed in the 1970s when the program finally came to light. What we know now is pieced together from the fragments that survive, from whistleblowers, and from people who never fully recovered from what was done to them. Some believe MKUltra never really ended, that it just simply changed names, moved deeper underground, or scattered into smaller, quieter projects. Others think it was a desperate, clumsy attempt that failed, leaving little but damaged lives and half-buried paper trails behind. As you listen to this, imagine those cold government buildings at night. The fluorescent lights humming, a handful of people convinced they're protecting the country by pushing human beings past their limits. And picture those same halls, dark and empty now. Doors locked, files shredded, only rumors and memories remaining. Now, we're going to move from mind control to plans for a war that never quite happened. Operation Northwoods, a war built on illusion. In the early 1960s, tensions with Cuba was rising. Behind closed doors, military planners were sketching out ideas on how to justify a larger conflict. Some of those ideas stayed in notebooks and briefing folders. Others were formalized into a proposal called Operation Northwoods. Northwoods was, at its core, a plan to stage or fabricate attacks that would be blamed on Cuba, creating public support for an invasion. The documents that later became public are strangely calm and matter-of-fact. They talk about staging fake hijackings, using drones disguised as passenger planes, simulating attacks on US ships, and planting evidence that pointed back to Havana. One scenario suggested faking the death of American college students on a chartered flight. That plane would appear to be shot down, but in reality, the students would land at a secret base. The wreckage would be staged, the story would be written before the event even happened. Another suggestion involved orchestrating violent incidents in American cities and then quietly directing the blame toward Cuban agents. Each idea was listed in tidy paragraphs with bullet points and proposed timelines, as if it was just another logistical exercise. The plan reached the highest levels of the Pentagon and made its way to the desk of President John F. Kennedy. And there the story seems to stop. Kennedy rejected it. Operation Northwoods was never approved. But the fact that it existed at all, that senior officials calmly discussed carrying out attacks on their own people or fabricating tragedies from scratch, is what keeps this file open in the mind of conspiracy researchers. Did similar ideas resurface decades later, under different names or for different purposes? Were there other operations that were greenlit that never found their way on the public record? Was Northwoods an outlier, a chilling proposal that died quietly in a drawer? We may never know for sure. What we do know is that at least once, a room full of serious men in uniforms and suits sat around a table and with straight faces debated creating illusions of violence and loss to move public opinion. Now, as you think about that, look to the sky. Project Bluebeam, the ultimate illusion. Our next story takes us from declassified memos and confirmed programs into something a bit more speculative. A theory that lives mostly in the shadows of the internet, on late-night radio shows, in quiet conversations between people who feel the official version of reality is incomplete, and on this YouTube channel. It's called Project Bluebeam. According to the theory, Bluebeam is a secret program designed to stage a world-changing event, not with bombs or invasions, but with illusions. The claim is that advanced holographic technology, psychological manipulation, and carefully crafted media narratives could be combined to simulate something so massive it would reshape society overnight. The most common version of this story says that Bluebeam would be used to fake an alien invasion. Imagine this for a moment. The night sky over major cities around the world. Strange shapes forming in the clouds. Enormous shimmering objects hovering silently. Lights that don't match anything we recognize from planes, drones, or satellites. News networks would cut to live footage. Social media would flood with shaky videos. Panicked voices and rumors would just fill the airways. Some people would say it's a hoax, others would insist it's the end of the world. Governments would hold hurried press conferences offering reassurances that don't calm anybody. In the Bluebeam scenario, all of this would be carefully planned. Proponents of this theory imagine projectors mounted on high-altitude aircraft or even satellites casting three-dimensional images into the sky. They talk about low-frequency sound waves used to influence mood, subtle messages embedded into the media, an entire toolkit designed to make people feel awe, fear, and confusion all at once. In another variation of the story, the goal isn't the alien invasion, but a manufactured spiritual event. In this version, a figure appears in the sky, a messianic presence tailored to each culture, speaking in a way that seems miraculously personal. A global religious experiment orchestrated by dissolving old belief systems and replacing them with something new and centrally controlled. When you trace this theory back, it often leads to one name and to a series of claims that have never been conclusively verified. There are no official documents stamped with the words Project Bluebeam, no smoking gun memos like the ones we have for MK Ultra or Operation Northwoods. Instead, there are patterns people point to. They note how realistic special effects have become in movies, how deepfakes can imitate faces and voices, how quickly a story, true or not, can circle the planet through social media in a matter of minutes. They look at the long history of government and intelligence agencies experimenting with propaganda and psychological operations, and they ask quietly whether those efforts might someday scale up into something much larger. Skeptics argue that Project Bluebeam is a modern myth, a reflection of our fears of being deceived and our growing mistrust of institutions. They point out how difficult it would be to coordinate a truly global illusion without something going wrong, without someone leaking proof. Believers say that if such a project did exist, its entire purpose would be to avoid those leaks, to make any whistleblower sound so unhinged that even before they open their mouth, nobody will believe them. For our purposes tonight, what matters isn't whether Project Bluebeam is real in a literal sense, but what it reveals about how we see the world. The idea that reality itself could be staged, that the sky could be used as a screen, that events could be scripted at a planetary level, taps into a very human anxiety. The fear that we are not just being lied to, but that the very stage we're standing on is being rearranged around us without our consent. So as you picture those imagined lights in the sky, the glowing shapes, the crowd staring up in confusion, just think about it. Eventually those colors will fade and the sounds will grow distant, and you don't need to decide if it's real or not. You don't need to solve any mystery tonight, but you're just observing a story around you, and hopefully in the future, you'll be a little wary when you see some strange things. Now, we're going to come back down to Earth to something much more ordinary on the surface. Money. Quiet rooms, interest rates, and an institution that for some holds the strings of the entire world economy. We're going to step into the calm, carpeted halls of central banking and the strange theories that surround it. The quiet powers of central banks. We're leaving behind social experiments and speculative sky projections, and we're stepping into a world that looks on the surface almost boring. Conference rooms, men and women in suits speaking in a calm, measured tone about interest rates, inflation, and long-term outlooks. This is the world of central banking, and for many conspiracy theorists, it's one of the most important stories of all. In the United States, the central bank is called the Federal Reserve. On paper, it's described as an independent central bank, created in 1913 to stabilize the financial system. Its official job is to manage inflation, support employment, and keep the economy on a relatively even path. It does this in part by controlling the cost of money. When the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, borrowing becomes more expensive. Mortgages, car loans, business loans, all of it slowly tightens. When it lowers rates, money becomes cheaper. Spending increases, the stock market often rises. The entire mood of the economy can shift based on a few carefully chosen words from the central bankers. To most people, this is just background noise. Something they hear in passing on the news and then forget. But to a certain kind of researcher, this quiet institution is the true center of power. According to them, real control doesn't come from elected officials who serve brief terms or from agencies that can be reshaped with each new administration. It comes from those who can create and direct the flow of money itself. One of the core claims is that the Federal Reserve is not truly federal in the way people assume. Yes, it was created by an act of Congress. Yes, it works closely with the government, but it also has a complex structure that includes privately owned regional banks, boards, and committees that are insulated from direct public votes. This mixed structure, part governmental, part independent, part private, has become fertile ground for suspicion. Critics argue that this separation shields central bankers from accountability, allowing decisions that favor large financial institutions and wealthy investors at the expense of ordinary people. They point to movements in history, the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, just before World War I, the role of the central bank in the Great Depression, The way financial crises are often followed by large bailouts for banks and corporations, while regular households struggle with job losses and foreclosures. Some go further, suggesting that a small network of banking families and financial interest has quietly shaped global events for more than a century, using debt, currency manipulation, and coordinated policy to guide nations in certain directions. In this view, wars boom and recessions are not random, but part of a larger pattern in which both money is the tool and the outcome. Supporters of the official narrative counter that managing a modern economy is incredibly difficult, that central banks are simply trying to prevent panics and crashes, and that their independence helps them keep focused on long-term stability rather than short-term political gain. They argue that without institutions like the Federal Reserve, financial crises might be even more frequent and severe, that the system is imperfect but not malicious. Still, the symbolism still lingers. The idea that a small group of unelected officials are meeting behind closed doors, adjusting numbers that affect the lives of millions, often without most people fully understanding how or why, is a powerful image. Imagine for a moment one of those meetings. A long table, folders neatly arranged, charts, graphs, and projections displayed on screens around the room. The conversation is quiet, technical, almost detached. Terms like basis points, liquidity, and asset purchases fill the air. Outside that room, the decisions being made translate into very real things. Whether someone can afford a home, whether a business survives another year, whether retirement accounts grow or shrink. To conspiracy theorists, this gap between calm abstract language inside the room and the concrete human consequences outside of it is where the unease lives. They ask who truly benefits when money is created, when debts are extended, when currencies are devaluated. They wonder whether democracy can be complete if one of the most powerful levers, the control of money itself, is placed in hands that are only loosely tethered to public will. Whether you see central banks as necessary guardians for the financial system, or as quiet engines of hidden control, the mystery remains partly intact because so much of what they do is invisible to everyday experience. There are no dramatic scenes, no flashing lights, just press conferences, carefully worded statements, and reactions that ripple through markets in ways that are hard to see, but are deeply felt. As you take in these calm, deliberate rooms, think about the details. The table, the paper, the murmur of voices. Think of it like a conversation happening in another building or on another street. You can't control what they say or really hear it, but it's part of the puzzle that's around you. So far, you've walked through hidden experiments, proposed false flags, speculative sky projections, and the quiet power of money. Each one is a doorway into a different kind of mystery, a different way of asking who's really in control. And for now, you can let those doorways close. All that matters is that you know who you are, and you can control your own actions. Now, we'll bring this journey to a close. This is a short video. According to my analytics, my viewers really like conspiracy theories, and I decided to make this short little one to hopefully either help people sleep because I bored them to death or maybe inform you really quick. No matter what, we believe some things, we doubt others, we learn. We change our minds, we let go of old explanations, and we pick up new ones. At the end of the day, we turn off the lights and we sleep. So for this final stretch, just know you can't control everything. You can't control the past, the future, or the secrets in locked rooms, or the files in hidden servers, or even the decisions made in quiet meetings far away. You can only control yourself. And all of this can exist together, out there, on the other side. Welcome back to The Other Side. Tonight we're exploring 7 conspiracy theories that really blur the line between speculation and documented reality. These aren't wild fantasies, they are stories built on declassified documents, eyewitness accounts, and historical records that challenge what we've been told. Now, this video is designed for sleep and to help you focus by playing it in the background. Each story naturally transitions to the next, and if you fall asleep during this, there are timestamps in the description to help you pick up where you left off. Get comfortable, lower the lights, and let's step into the other side of history. Our first story takes us to the height of the Cold War and the terrible price of the space race. On April 12, 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. His flight lasted 108 minutes. He orbited the Earth once, then returned home safely to a hero's welcome. The Soviet Union had won the space race. But there's another version of this story, one that asks a very simple question. Was Yuri Gagarin really the first? Or was he simply the first cosmonaut to survive? The evidence comes from an unlikely source: 2 brothers in Italy and a homemade radio station. Achille and Giovanni Giudica Cordelia were amateur radio enthusiasts living in Turin, Italy. In the late 1950s, they built a radio station in an abandoned German bunker. Their goal was simple: intercept Soviet space transmissions. The Soviet Union was very secretive about their space program. Launch dates were never announced in advance, and cosmonauts were only named after successful missions. The failures were buried in classified reports. But radio waves don't respect borders, and the brothers were listening. Between 1960 and 1961, they claimed to have intercepted multiple transmissions, not from successful missions, but from dying cosmonauts. Their first recording came in November of 1960. The brothers picked up what they described as labored breathing and a faint, irregular heartbeat. Then silence. They believed they had listened to a cosmonaut suffocating to death in orbit. In February 1961, 2 months before Gagarin's flight, they recorded another transmission. This time it was SOS signals in Morse code. Desperate, repeating, and then fading away. But the most haunting recording came in May 1961, 1 month after Gagarin's triumphant return. The brothers intercepted a female voice. She was speaking Russian. Her words were calm at first, almost procedural. She then reported instrument readings, capsule temperature, trajectory data. And then her tone changed. "I am hot," she said. "I can see a flame, and I am hot." Her breathing became rapid and panicked. "I can see a flame," she repeated. "I can see a flame." And then the transmission cut out. The brothers believed they had just listened to a woman who burnt up during re-entry. A cosmonaut whose name was never recorded, whose mission was never acknowledged, who died alone, falling back to Earth. They released their recordings to the press, and the story spread across Europe. The Soviet Union denied everything. No female cosmonauts had been sent into space. The recordings were dismissed as hoaxes or misidentified satellite signals. But the denials raised more questions than they answered. Soviet archives from that data remained partially classified. The names of early cosmonauts who died in training accidents were kept secrets for decades. In the 1960s, a rocket explosion killed over 100 people, and that wasn't acknowledged until 1989. The Soviet space program had a documented history of erasing their failures. So the question remains, were there others? Cosmonauts sent up before Gagarin who didn't make it back? Test pilots whose capsules burn up upon re-entry? Or people that just drifted off into the void of space? The brothers recorded over 30 hours of transmissions. Most were routine, some were disturbing, and a few were never fully explained. Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman in space in 1963. Her mission was successful, and she orbited Earth 48 times before she returned safely. But some researchers point to inconsistencies in the Soviet timeline, gaps in cosmonaut training records, photos of unnamed pilots in pressure suits who never flew official missions. In 2011, a former Soviet space engineer named Mikhail Rudenko gave an interview. He claimed that at least 3 cosmonauts died in failed missions before Gagarin's flight. Their names, he said, were classified. Their families were told they died in aircraft accidents. The recordings made by those 2 brothers in Italy have been analyzed by audio experts. Some believe they're authentic Soviet transmissions. Others argue they could be terrestrial radio tests or even propaganda. The truth may never be fully known, because Soviet space archives remain partially sealed. Families of early cosmonauts have also been reluctant to speak publicly, but the recordings still exist. You can listen to them online. The labored breathing, the SOS signals, the woman saying, "I can see the flame." And you can decide for yourself whether Yuri Gagarin was truly the first. When was the last time you felt like you were talking to a real person online? Not a bot, not a corporate account, not the algorithm pretending to be human, but an actual person with thoughts and opinions that weren't copy and pasted from somewhere else. If you can't remember, you're not alone. This is the dead internet theory, and it suggests that the internet as we knew it, the wild, chaotic, human-driven internet that we knew, died sometime around 2016. What we're using now is something else, a carefully managed illusion. A digital graveyard populated by bots, AI-generated content, and corporate astroturfing, all designed to manufacture consensus and drive consumption. And the unsettling part is that there is evidence everywhere. The dead internet theory originated on forums like 4chan and Agora Road's Macintosh Cafe around 2016 and 2017. Users began noticing something strange. The internet felt empty. Conversations felt very scripted, viral trends seemed manufactured, and comment sections were filled with generic responses that could have been written by the same person or even the same program. This theory proposes that the majority of internet traffic is no longer generated by humans. Instead, it's bots, millions of them, posting, commenting, liking, sharing, and creating the illusion of activity. And the numbers support this. In 2022, a report by Imperva found that nearly 48% of all internet traffic came from bots. Not humans, but automated programs designed to scrape data, manipulate engagement metrics, and simulate human behavior. Social media platforms were the worst offenders. Studies estimate 15 to 20% of Twitter accounts are bots. Facebook has admitted to removing billions of fake accounts per year, and Instagram is flooded with engagement pods and automated comment scripts. But it's not just social media, it's everywhere. E-commerce sites use fake reviews generated by AI. News websites are filled with articles written by language models and not journalists. YouTube comment sections are dominated by spam bots and engagement farmers. Even this video right now is likely being watched by bots. Programs designed to inflate view counts, track user behavior, and feed data into recommendation algorithms. The dead internet theory goes further. It suggests this isn't accidental, it's intentional. Governments and corporations, the theory argues, realized that the internet was too chaotic and too unpredictable. It was full of real people with real opinions that couldn't be controlled. So they replaced it. Not all at once, but gradually, by flooding platforms with bots and AI-generated content until real human voices were drowned out, until the algorithm became the curator of reality. And the goal was to manufacture consensus. They wanted to control the narrative and drive consumption. Think about how the internet feels now compared to 10 years ago. In 2010, forums were alive. Niche communities thrived. You could stumble into a weird blog written by one person with a unique perspective, and Super Hulock was taking over the internet. Now, everything is algorithmic. Every platform looks the same, content is optimized for engagement, not creativity. Viral trends feel manufactured because they are. They're tested and refined and pushed out by automated systems. And the theory points to specific turning points. In 2016, the rise of algorithmic timelines on Facebook and Twitter led to the end of chronological feeds, and this was the beginning of curated reality. In 2017, the explosion of AI-generated content was released. Bots that could write articles, create memes, and hold conversations almost indistinguishable from humans. In 2020, the pandemic took over. Lockdowns pushed everybody online and the bots followed. By some estimates, bot traffic increased by 25% during the pandemic. The Dead Internet theory asked, how much of what you see online is real? That viral tweet with 100,000 likes, probably boosted by engagement farms. That Reddit thread with thousands of comments, likely filled with bots copy and pasting old responses. That YouTube video with millions of views that I've yet to get myself. Some of those views are automated. Some of those comments are scripts. And the most unsettling part, you can almost not tell the difference anymore. AI language models like GPT have become so sophisticated they can mimic human writing perfectly. They can generate opinions, tell stories, and argue in comment sections. And they do, constantly. The theory suggests that we've reached a tipping point. A point where the majority of online content is no longer created by real living humans. It's created by machines for machines to manipulate humans. And the real people? We're just wandering through a graveyard, interacting with ghosts. Is the Dead Internet theory true? Not entirely. There's still real people online, real communities, and real conversations. There's real people watching this or listening to it on Spotify. But the core observation is undeniable. The internet feels different now. Less human, more algorithmic, more empty. Whether it's a deliberate conspiracy or an unintended consequence of automation, it doesn't change the result. The internet we grew up with, the chaotic, creative, human-driven internet, is fading. What's replacing it is something else. Something that looks like the internet and sounds like the internet, but isn't. Some sort of virtual Wendigo. Some sort of virtual doppelganger. And the question we're left with is simple. Are you talking to real people online? Or are you the last real person left? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. In 1955, the CIA declassified a program that sounds like it's from science fiction. For over 20 years, the United States government had spent millions of dollars researching psychic abilities. Specifically, remote viewing, the ability to see distant locations using only the mind. The program was called Project Stargate, and according to the official reports, it was a failure. The psychics couldn't reliably gather information, the results were inconclusive, and the program was terminated. But there's another version of the story. One that asked, what if it worked? What if the declassification was a smokescreen? What if the real program, the successful one, is still running, buried deep in the black budget? This is the story of Project Stargate, and the conspiracy that it never really ended. Now, much like Stranger Things, the origins of Project Stargate go back to the Cold War. In the 1970s, US intelligence agencies became concerned that the Soviet Union was developing psychic warfare capabilities. Reports suggested the Soviets were training remote viewers, psychics who could spy on American military installations without ever leaving Moscow. The CIA couldn't afford to fall behind, so in 1975, they launched their own program. It was originally called Scanate, and then Grill Flame, and then Center Lane. Eventually, it became known as Project Stargate. The goal was simple: determine if psychic phenomena could be weaponized for intelligence gathering. The method they focused on was remote viewing. The concept is straightforward. A viewer is given coordinates, latitude and longitude, sometimes just a photograph, and then they describe what they see at that location using only their mind. No technology, no physical travel, just consciousness reaching across space. The CIA recruited psychics, but also trained ordinary people, military personnel, intelligence analysts, anybody who showed potential. The training took place at Fort Meade in Maryland in a nondescript building that looked like any other office complex. One of the most famous remote viewers was a man named Joseph McMoneagle. He was an Army intelligence officer who claimed to have natural psychic abilities. In 1979, he was asked to locate a new type of Soviet submarine. He was given no information except that it was a submarine. He sat in a quiet room, entered a meditative state, and began describing what he saw. He described a massive submarine, larger than anything the US had seen before. He drew sketches of its hull design, estimated its size to be nearly 600 feet long, and he described its location, a construction facility in northern Russia. Months later, satellite imagery confirmed everything he had described. The Soviets were building a new class of ballistic missile submarine, the Typhoon class, the largest submarine ever constructed, and it matched McMoneagle's descriptions almost exactly. This wasn't the only success. Declassified documents show that remote viewers were used in dozens of operations. In the 1980s, a remote viewer located a downed Soviet bomber in Africa. The CIA had searched for it for weeks, and the viewer pinpointed it to a location within a few miles. In 1989, remote viewers were asked to describe a suspected chemical weapons factory in Libya. They provided detailed descriptions of the building's interior layout. When the building was later inspected, their descriptions were accurate. But the most disturbing application came during the Iran hostage crisis in 1979. Remote viewers were asked to locate American hostages being held in Tehran. Several viewers independently described the same building, the same room, the same faces. The accuracy was unsettling, because if remote viewing worked for finding submarines and hostages, what else could it be used for? The program continued for over 20 years. Millions of dollars were spent, thousands of remote viewing sessions were conducted, and then in 1995, it was suddenly declassified and terminated. The official explanation came in a report commissioned by the CIA. Two researchers, Jessica Utz and Ray Hyman, were asked to evaluate the program's effectiveness. Their conclusions were contradictory. Utz, a statistician, found that remote viewing produced results that were statistically significant. Better than a chance, she concluded that the phenomenon was real. Hyman, a psychologist and a skeptic, argued that the results were inconsistent and couldn't be replicated reliably. He concluded remote viewing had no practical intelligence value. The CIA sided with Hyman. Project Stargate was terminated, the psychics were dismissed, and the program was declassified and released to the public as a Cold War curiosity. Case closed. But here's where the conspiracy begins. Why would the CIA declassify an intelligence program while it was still potentially useful? Intelligence agencies don't reveal their methods unless those methods are obsolete or unless they want you to think they're obsolete. The conspiracy theory suggests Project Stargate wasn't terminated, it was rebranded. The public version, the one with inconsistent results and questionable methodology, was declassified as a smokescreen. The real program, the one that actually works, went deeper into the black budget. New name, new location, new recruits, and this time, no paper trail. There's circumstantial evidence to support this. In 1995, the same year Stargate was declassified, the US defense budget included over $30 billion in classified spending. Black budget programs that Congress couldn't fully audit, programs with no public names. Former remote viewers have claimed that they were approached after Stargate's termination and they were offered positions by private defense contractors. And they're also asked to continue their work in secret. Joseph McMoneagle himself stated in interviews he believes the research continued. He suggested the declassification was a strategy, a way to stop public scrutiny while the real work continued in secret. And there's a logical reason why the government would want to hide a successful psychic program. If remote viewing works, if consciousness can genuinely access distant locations, then privacy becomes impossible. Secure facilities become vulnerable, secrets become accessible, and the implications are terrifying. A government that perfected remote viewing wouldn't announce it, they would bury it, because the strategic advantage of psychic espionage only works if your enemies don't know you have it. So the question remains, did Project Stargate really end in 1995, or did it just go underground? The declassified documents from Project Stargate are publicly available. You can read the thousands of pages that detail remote viewing sessions, training protocols, and operational results. But those documents only cover the program up until 1995. After that, there's nothing. No follow-up research, no continuation studies, just silence. And in the world of intelligence, silence is rarely accidental. Whether Project Stargate continues under a different name, or whether it truly was a failed experiment, one thing is for certain. For over 20 years, the United States government took psychic phenomena seriously enough to spend millions of dollars researching it. And if they stopped, it's worth asking why. In 1998, astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour photographed something strange. An unidentified black object tumbling slowly in low Earth orbit. NASA classified it as space debris, a thermal blanket lost during a previous mission. But some researchers believe it was something else. Something much older. An artificial satellite of unknown origins that had been orbiting the Earth for over 13,000 years. They call it the Black Knight satellite. And the conspiracy suggests that NASA has known about it for decades and has been actively hiding the truth. This is a story that spans for over a century, from Nikola Tesla's mysterious radio signals to Cold War paranoia to a single haunting photograph taken in orbit. And it asks a simple question: are we being watched? The story of the Black Knight begins in 1899, long before humans had ever reached space. Nikola Tesla was conducting an experiment in his laboratory in Colorado Springs. He had built a massive radio receiver designed to detect electromagnetic signals from the atmosphere. Tesla believed he could pick up signals from distant storms or even other planets. One night, Tesla detected something unusual, a repeating radio signal. It wasn't random static, it had structure, pattern, and it repeated at regular intervals like a pulse. Tesla was convinced he had intercepted a signal from Mars, and he wrote about it in journals and gave interviews suggesting that intelligent life was trying to communicate with Earth. The scientific community dismissed him. The signals, they argued, were probably natural phenomenon, interference from Earth's magnetosphere, or perhaps radiation from distant stars. But Tesla insisted he had detected something artificial, something intentional. Decades later, the mystery deepened. In 1927, a Norwegian engineer named Jorgen Hals was conducting radio experiments when he detected strange echoes. He would transmit a signal and seconds later it would bounce back. But the delay times were inconsistent. Sometimes 3 seconds, sometimes 8, sometimes 15. These weren't normal radio echoes. Normal echoes bounce off the ionosphere and return almost immediately. These were delayed, as if something in orbit was receiving the signal, holding it, and transmitting it back. Other researchers confirmed Hall's findings. The phenomenon became known as long delay echoes, or LDEs, and nobody could explain them. Then in 1954, the mystery took another turn. Aviation Week magazine posted an article claiming the US Air Force had detected 2 satellites orbiting Earth. This was 3 years before Sputnik, 3 years before any nation had successfully launched a satellite. The articles suggest these objects were of unknown origin, possibly Soviet, but possibly something else. The Pentagon quickly denied the story. No such satellites existed. and the article was retracted. But the rumors persisted. In 1960, Time magazine reported that the US Navy had detected a dark, tumbling object in polar orbit. It wasn't American, it wasn't Soviet. Both superpowers denied ownership, so the object was nicknamed the Black Knight. The Navy tracked it for weeks, and it was in a highly unusual orbit. Polar, meaning it passed over both poles. At the time, neither the US nor the Soviet Union had the capability to launch satellites into polar orbit. Then, as mysteriously as it appeared, it vanished from tracking systems. The story went quiet for decades, until 1998. During the STS-88 mission, the first space shuttle mission to the International Space Station, astronauts photographed an unusual object floating near the shuttle. The photograph is striking. A black, irregularly shaped object, clearly artificial, tumbling slowly against the backdrop of Earth. It doesn't look like typical space debris, as it's too structured and too deliberate. NASA's official explanation was that it's a thermal blanket that had come loose during a spacewalk, a piece of insulation that drifted away and was later retrieved. But conspiracy researchers weren't satisfied. They pointed out inconsistencies. The object in the photograph appeared larger and more solid than a thermal blanket. Its shape doesn't match any standard shuttle insulation, and most importantly, the photograph was taken before the thermal blanket was reported missing. The conspiracy theory crystallized. The Black Knight satellite is real. It's an ancient artificial object in Earth's orbit, and NASA has been covering it up for decades. Some version of the original theory go further. They claim the satellite is 13,000 years old and that it has extraterrestrial origins, that it's been transmitting signals, those same signals Tesla detected in 1899 for a millennia. The theory suggests that the satellite is a probe, a monitoring device left by an ancient civilization to observe Earth. And every few decades, when we get close to discovering it, the cover-up begins again. Why 13,000 years old? That number comes from researcher Duncan Lunan, who in the 1970s analyzed those long delay echoes from the 1920s. He plotted the delay times on a graph and claimed they formed a star map. A map pointing to Epsilon Boötis, a star system 203 light-years away. Lunan suggests the echoes were a message that has been repeating for 13,000 years, waiting for humanity to develop the technology to decode it. His research was later duplicated, and other scientists couldn't replicate his results. Lunan himself eventually distanced himself from the Black Knight theory, but the idea had taken root. The Black Knight satellite remains one of the most enduring space mysteries. The photograph from STS-88 is real, and you can find it in NASA's archives. Object identification STS-088-724-66. NASA maintains that's a thermal blanket, a mundane piece of space debris that happened to be photographed at the right angle to look mysterious. But the broader story, the century of strange signals, the unidentified objects, and the explained orbital anomalies, is harder to dismiss entirely. Tesla did detect unusual radio signals in 1899. That is documented. Whether they came from space or a terrestrial source is unknown. Long delay echoes are real. Radio engineers have recorded them for decades. The explanations range from ionosphere anomalies to reflections of space debris, but some LDEs still defy easy explanation. The 1960s Time magazine report of a mysterious object in polar orbit was real. The Navy did track something, whether it was a secret Soviet satellite or a misidentified asteroid or something else, it was never conclusively determined. And that 1998 photograph, it exists, it's strange, and while NASA's explanation is plausible, it's also convenient. The Black Knight satellite theory persists because it touches on something deeper than evidence. It asks whether we're alone, whether we've been watched, whether something out there has been monitoring Earth for thousands and thousands of years, silently waiting. And in the absence of definitive proof, either way, the mystery endures, orbiting somewhere between documented fact and collective imagination. What year is it? At the time of this recording, you'd probably say 2025 without hesitation. But what if you're wrong? What if the calendar we use, the one that governs every aspect of our modern life, is off by nearly 300 years? This is the phantom time hypothesis, and it suggests that the early Middle Ages, roughly 1614 AD to 911 AD, never happened. That nearly 3 centuries of history were fabricated, invented by medieval rulers in the Catholic Church to legitimize their power. And according to this theory, we're not living in 2025, we're living in 1728. Charlemagne never existed. The Viking Age is fiction. Entire generations of people, events, and cultural developments were simply made up. And the evidence, according to the believers, is hiding in plain sight, in architecture that doesn't match its supposed age, in documents that appear too pristine, in historic records filled with suspicious gaps and contradictions. This is the story of 297 years of missing history. The phantom time hypothesis was proposed in 1991 by German historian Herbert Illig. He wasn't a fringe conspiracy theorist, he was a published researcher with a background in system analysis and historic chronology. Illig's argument was based on a simple observation. The early Middle Ages don't make any sense. Architecturally, there's a gap. Roman construction techniques from the 6th century are remarkably similar to Romanesque architecture from the 10th century. But the 3 centuries in between, the supposed Middle Ages, show almost no architectural development. It's as if the builders in 600 AD and the builders for 900 AD were working from the same knowledge base, and those 300 years of innovation and evolution simply didn't happen. Illig pointed to other anomalies. The Gregorian calendar reform of 1582 was designed to correct a drift caused by the Julian calendar's slight inaccuracy. Pope Gregory XIII removed 10 days from the calendar to realign it with the solar year. But here's the problem. If the Julian calendar had been used since 45 BC, a span of 1,627 years, the drift should have been 13 days, not 10. Illig calculated the missing 3 days responded to roughly 300 years. 3 centuries that were counted on the calendar but never actually occurred. His conclusion: somebody added 297 phantom years to history, and the most likely culprit was the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II, working together around the year 1000 AD. Now, why would they do this? Prestige, legitimacy, and power. Otto III wanted to rule in the year 1000 AD, a millennial year with apocalyptic significance in Christian theology, but according to the actual calendar, it was only around 700 AD. So he and the Pope simply changed the date. They backdated the calendar by 300 years and filled in the gaps with invented history. Charlemagne, according to Illig, was the centerpiece of this fabrication. Charlemagne, Charles the Great, was one of the most important figures in European history. He united much of Western Europe, he was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope in 800 AD, and his reign is considered the foundation of medieval European civilization. But Illig argues that Charlemagne never existed. He was a fictional character invented to fill the phantom centuries with a legendary hero king. A ruler so great, so powerful, that his existence alone justified the legitimacy of Otto III's empire. The evidence Illig cites is circumstantial but intriguing to say the least. Charlemagne's biography, written by a monk named Einhard, is suspiciously similar to early Roman biographies, almost as if it was copied from a template rather than based on real events. Archaeological evidence from Charlemagne's capital in Germany is sparse. The palace complex attributed to him shows architectural styles that don't match the 9th century. Some structures appeared older, some appear newer, and none of them fit neatly into the timeline. And then there's the documents. Thousands of charters, land grants, and official records, supposedly from Charlemagne's reign, but many of them are written on parchment that, when tested, date to later centuries. They're either forgeries or backdated copies. Illig suggests these documents were created later, during the 11th and 12th centuries, to provide a paper trail for the Phantom Years. But Charlemagne isn't the only casualty of the Phantom Time hypothesis. If 297 years were fabricated, then everything from that period is suspect. The Viking Age, invented or misdated. The spread of Islam into Europe, compressed into a much shorter time frame. The Byzantine Empire's history, filled with phantom emperors and fictional wars. Even the Quran, according to some extreme versions of the theory, was backdated to give Islam a longer historical pedigree. Illig and his supporters point to other oddities. Tree ring dating, for one, shows some inconsistencies in the early medieval ages. Certain tree ring sequences don't match the expected natural patterns for this period. Carbon-14 dating, while generally reliable, has a high margin of error that could potentially hide a 300-year gap, especially for artifacts from the 7th to 10th century. And then there's the historic record itself. The early Middle Ages are often called the Dark Ages for a reason. Written records are scarce, archaeological evidence is limited, and entire decades pass with almost no documentation. Illig asks, is this because it was a chaotic, poorly documented period, or is it because those years never happened at all? The mainstream historical community has overwhelmingly rejected the phantom time hypothesis. Astronomers point to records of solar eclipses that can be dated precisely. Chinese, Islamic, and Byzantine sources all record eclipses during the supposed phantom years, and their dates align with astronomical calculations. Tree ring experts have debunked Illig's claims about tree ring gaps. Continuous tree ring sequences stretch back thousands of years, with no 300-year gap. Archaeologists note that the Middle Ages do show cultural development, it's just slower and less dramatic than other periods. The architectural similarities, Illig noted, are better explained by the collapse of Roman infrastructure than by the gradual rebuilding of construction knowledge. And historians point out that the phantom time hypothesis requires a conspiracy of staggering scale. Not just Otto III and the Pope, but scribes across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, all coordinating to fabricate centuries of history, all keeping the secret for 1,000 years. It's implausible, but it's not impossible, because history as we know it is written by the victors in the blood of the losers. It's remembered by those in power, and if a medieval emperor wanted to legitimize his rule by inventing a glamorous past, who would stop him? The phantom time hypothesis remains a fringe theory. Most historians consider it thoroughly debunked. The evidence against it, astronomical records, tree ring dating, and cross-cultural documentation, is overwhelming. But the theory endures because of its uncomfortable questions. How much of history do we take on faith? How many historic figures are known only through documents written centuries after their death? How many events are recorded by a single source and never corroborated? The answer is more than you'd think. History is not a perfect record, it's a reconstruction, built from fragments, interpreted by scholars, and shaped by cultural biases and political agendas. And if 297 years could theoretically be fabricated, what else might be? We're probably not living in 1728. The evidence says we're in 2025 at the time of this recording. But the phantom time hypothesis reminds us that the past is less certain than we'd like to believe. And certainty in history is a luxury we rarely have. In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out on a skiing expedition in the Ural Mountains of Russia. They were students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, fit, trained, and prepared for harsh winter conditions. None of them returned alive. When the rescue teams finally found them weeks later, the scene was inexplicable. The tent had been cut open from the inside. The hikers had fled into the freezing night, many of them barefoot or half-dressed. Their bodies were scattered across the mountainside, some showing injuries that seemed impossible. The official Soviet investigation concluded with a single cryptid phrase: death by compelling natural forces. But what natural force could explain what happened in those mountains? What could cause 9 people to tear through their tent, run to their deaths, and die in sub-zero temperatures? For over 60 years, the Dyatlov Pass incident has remained one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in history, and the conspiracy theories surrounding it suggest the truth was deliberately buried. This is the story of what happened on that night in February of 1959 on a remote mountain the locals call the Mountain of Death. The group was led by Igor Dyatov, a 23-year-old engineering student. The other members were his friends and classmates. 8 men, 2 women, ranging from ages 20 to 37. They were all experienced hikers and members of the university sport club. Their route was ambitious but not unprecedented. They planned to reach Otorten Mountain, about 200 miles north of their starting point. This trip was classified as Category 3, the most difficult designation in Soviet mountaineering. On January 27th, they took a train to the last inhabited settlement and then began their trek on January 28th. One member, Yuri Gagarin, turned back early due to illness, and he would be the only survivor. The remaining 9 continued north. They kept a diary and took photographs. The images show them smiling, skiing, setting up camps, and everything appeared normal. Then on February 1st, they reached the slopes of the Mountain of Death. According to their plan, they should have reached Otorten the next day and sent a telegram confirming their safe arrival by February 12th. The telegram never came. When the group failed to report in, a search party was organized. On February 26th, rescuers found their tent. And what they saw didn't make sense. The tent was still standing, partially buried in snow. It had been cut open from the inside, long deliberate slashes through the fabric, as if the hikers had been in such a desperate hurry to escape they couldn't even open the entrance flap. Inside the tent, everything was left behind. Boots, warm clothing, food, and their skis were still propped up outside. Footprints led away from the tent and down the slope toward the tree line about a mile away. The tracks showed that some of the hikers were barefoot, others were only socks, some were in their underwear. At the edge of the forest, rescuers found the remains of a small fire, and nearby the first 2 bodies. 2 of them were lying near the fire, wearing only underwear, and both had died of hypothermia. Their hands showed signs of climbing, bark and branches under their fingernails. They had been trying to climb a cedar tree. Some of its branches, up to 15 feet high, had been broken off. Why would they climb a tree in the middle of the night, in sub-zero cold, wearing almost nothing? Over the next few months, the other bodies were found. Igor was found 1,000 feet from the tent, lying face up in the snow. He had been trying to crawl back, and he died of hypothermia. 2 others were found between him and the tent, also died of hypothermia. One had a small skull fracture, but it wasn't severe enough to cause death. The last 4 bodies weren't found until May when the snow melted. They were in a ravine about 250 feet from the cedar tree, buried under 12 feet of snow. And this is where the mystery deepens. These 4 found in the ravine had severe injuries, not from the cold, but from trauma. One had a massive skull fracture. 2 others had major chest fractures, broken ribs, crushed sternums, and the medical examiner compared the force required to cause these injuries to a car crash. There were no external wounds, no cuts, no bruises, just massive internal trauma, as if they had been subjected to extreme pressure. One was even missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her facial tissue. Another was just missing his eyes. The official investigation noted these details but offered no explanation. Some of the bodies showed traces of radiation, not lethal levels but higher than normal background radiation. The final report, issued May 1959, concluded that the hikers died from a compelling natural force which they were unable to overcome. The case was closed, the files were sealed, and the conspiracy theories began. The most popular theory is that it was a military test gone wrong. The Ural Mountains were a restricted military zone. The Soviet Union conducted weapons testing in the area, and some of the researchers believe the hikers stumbled upon a test site, possibly a missile launch or a thermobaric weapons test. Thermobaric weapons create a massive pressure wave. This can cause severe internal injuries without external damages, exactly like the injuries found on the 4 bodies in the ravine. If the hikers witnessed an unauthorized test and were accidentally caught in the blast radius, the military would have a strong motive to cover it up. The radiation traces support this theory. So do reports of other hikers in the area that night, who claim they saw glowing orbs in the sky, possibly from missiles or flares. Another theory is infrasound. Infrasound is a low-frequency sound below the range of human hearing. Under certain wind conditions, the mountains can produce infrasound waves, and studies have shown that infrasound can cause feelings of panic, dread, and orientation. If the hikers were exposed to intense infrasound, it could explain their irrational behavior, cutting through the tent, fleeing into the cold, and climbing trees. They have been experiencing a shared panic attack induced by the sound waves. If the hikers were exposed to intense infrasound, it could explain their irrational behavior, cutting through the tent, fleeing into the cold, climbing trees. They may have been experiencing a shared panic attack induced by the sound waves. The chest injuries could be explained by a snow slab avalanche, not a large one, but enough to create pressure that caused inner trauma. The third theory is paradoxical undressing. This is a real phenomenon. In the final stages of hypothermia, victims sometimes feel an intense burning sensation and remove their clothes. It's the result of the body's thermoregulation failing. This could explain why some hikers were found in their underwear, but doesn't explain the tent being cut open, or the injuries, or the missing eyes and tongue. Some researchers suggest scavenging animals removed the soft tissue, but the medical examiner noted that the tongue appeared to have been removed while she was still alive, based on the blood accumulation in the area. The most extreme conspiracy theories involve UFOs, Yeti attacks, or secret Soviet experiments on the hikers themselves. These are less plausible, but they persist because the official explanation, compelling natural force, explains nothing. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the investigation. After reviewing the evidence, they concluded that a small avalanche caused injuries in the panic. The case was closed again. But many researchers reject this conclusion. The slope wasn't steep enough for an avalanche, and there was no evidence of avalanche debris. And the avalanche doesn't explain the radiation, the missing soft tissue, or the fact that the tent was cut from the inside. So what really happened on the Mountain of Death that night? 9 people who were experienced and rational suddenly cut their way out of their tent and fled into the deadly cold. Some climbed a tree, some tried to return, and 4 suffered injuries consistent with massive trauma. All of them died. The truth may be simpler. The theory suggests a combination of factors: sudden weather, panic, hypothermia, and bad luck. Or it may be something darker, something the Soviet government doesn't want revealed. Despite 2 investigations spanning 60 years, this is officially unsolved. Atlantis. For some, it's a tired fantasy. A shining island, crystal towers, and a civilization swallowed by the sea. For others, it's a distorted memory of something that actually happened. Of a real culture, perhaps even a technologically sophisticated one, erased completely from public record. In this episode, we're going to treat Atlantis like a cold case. We'll start with the only primary source we have, examine how mainstream historians interpret it, and connect it to real archaeological events. And then we're going to carefully step into more speculative territory of lost advanced technology and a possible civilization that knew things we're only now rediscovering. Before we start, do me a favor and leave a comment down below and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from and if you have any suggestions for upcoming videos. I greatly appreciate you. Thank you. Our story begins with a single man, the Greek philosopher Plato. Everything we know about Atlantis comes from 2 of his works, Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE. There is no other Atlantean legend that we can point to in surviving text. There is no independent ancient historian confirming its tale. It is Plato, and Plato alone, who lifts the curtain on this island empire. In his dialogues, he claims the story came to him through his ancestor Solon, a respected Athenian lawgiver. Solon, Plato says, visited Egypt around 600 BCE, where a priest told him of an event in their distant past, a war between a virtuous ancient Athens and a powerful island nation called Atlantis. According to the priest, this war took place 9,000 years before Solon's time. Plato describes Atlantis as a vast island located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what is now called the Strait of Gibraltar, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. He says it was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined and ruled over other islands and parts of the mainland. The Atlanteans, in his account, were extraordinarily wealthy and organized. Their capital city was built on a complex system of concentric rings of land and water connected by canals and bridges. Ships could sail all the way to the central island, where a great palace and a temple to Poseidon dominated the landscape. The city, according to Plato, glittered with metals, gold, silver, and a strange reddish substance called orichalcum, said to be only second to gold in value. He describes a society that possessed advanced hydraulic engineering, extensive irrigation systems, and harbors full of warships. Their plains were carefully divided into rectangular plots, fertilized by a network of canals. They had chariot races, organized armies, and had a navy capable of projecting power across the known world. For generations, Plato says, the Atlanteans were noble and restrained. They valued virtue more than wealth. But over time, their moral fiber decayed. Ambition, greed, and the hunger for domination began to define them. They turned their attention outward, attempting to conquer other lands, including an idealized version of ancient Athens. In response, the gods judged them, and in a single day and night of misfortune, earthquakes and floods broke the island apart, and Atlantis sank beneath the sea. On the surface, it sounds like a historical report. There's dates, locations, political systems, family lines, details of geography, and even architectural details. But Plato was not a historian. He was a philosopher. Timaeus and Critias are philosophical dialogues, not chronicles. That was the first and most important point that the mainstream interpretation takes. Most academics see Atlantis as an allegory, a deliberately crafted story designed to explore ideas, the corrupting influence of power, the contrast between a virtuous society and one descending into chaos, and also the consequences of turning away from moral restraints. In this reading, Atlantis is a literary device. The fact that no other Greek or Roman writer of the time mentions it, not even Herodotus or any other major historian, makes it strong evidence that Plato invented it. Still, there's something about how specific his description was that has kept this conversation alive. He doesn't just say, a great island far away. He gives measurements and even agricultural planting information. That is a level of detail that has led some researchers to have a more nuanced position. Plato may have constructed a fictional story, but he could have based it loosely on real events and real civilizations. If you strip Atlantis down to its skeleton, a powerful island culture, a maritime power that was suddenly devastated by natural disasters, you start to see possible historic parallels. One of the most compelling is the Minoan civilization, centered on the island of Crete, which flourished roughly between 2700 and 1450 BCE. The Minoans were an advanced seafaring culture with impressive architecture, complex art, and wide-ranging trade networks. Their palace, like the one at Knossos, had a sophisticated drainage system, storerooms, and multi-story buildings. To the north on the island of Thera, they had a large city that thrived in the Bronze Age. It had paved streets, multi-level houses, and colorful frescoes. Then sometime around 1600, that island, Thera, erupted. The eruption of Thera is estimated to have been one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded human prehistory. It likely generated massive tsunamis, toxic ash clouds, and widespread climate disruption. Coastal settlements were destroyed, trade networks were shattered, and the island itself was buried in volcanic material, frozen in time under meters of ash. The Minoans on Crete suffered greatly in the aftermath and eventually declined with their power broken. To later generations, hearing fragments of that story, it might have become exactly what Atlantis sounds like. A wealthy, seafaring island culture struck down by sudden, overwhelming catastrophe. Most archaeologists who entertain a real-world Atlantis scenario stop here. They don't believe in literal crystal power plants or lost laser weapons, but they acknowledge that Plato could have heard distorted echoes of events like the Thera eruption, the fall of the Minoans, and the chaos of the late Bronze Age. In this sense, Atlantis might not be a single precise place, but a composite memory blending multiple disasters and multiple cultures into one symbolic story. It was then used by Plato as a moral example. That's the conservative view, and it rests on evidence we can go and touch: ruins, ash layers, and geological data. Now, we move into the remaining 30%, the part that pulls people down late-night rabbit holes. The idea that Atlantis was not just advanced for its time, but possessed technology that rivals or surpasses our own today. This is where the story leaves the comfort of textbooks and shifts into the realm of alternative history. One of the core claims in this world is that the Atlanteans mastered a form of energy technology, unlike anything ever officially recorded. The mention of Orcalum, the detailed canal system, and the almost utopian abundance are taken as hints of something more. In some versions, Atlantis used massive crystals to generate and transmit power. These crystals weren't decorative, they were functional, acting as resonators or antennas, drawing energy from the Earth's magnetic field, from the sun, or from some as yet unknown natural process. Tower-like structures, perhaps similar to obelisks or pyramids, are imagined as nodes in a global network, sending power wirelessly across distance. Supporters of this idea point to myths from various cultures that describe stones that glow, spears of lightning, or voices carried without sound. They argue that these might be garbled memories of ancient high-tech society. They also look at megalithic sites around the world, from Stonehenge to the pyramids to less well-known stone circles and standing stones, and suggest their alignment and acoustic properties hint at a deeper energetic purpose. Mainstream science doesn't accept any of this as evidence of lost reactors or wireless grids, and the stones, as far as experiments can show, don't behave like batteries or antennas in any way. But the idea persists because it offers a simple explanation for a deeper unease, the feeling that there are gaps in our knowledge of early human engineering. Another popular alternative view is that the Atlantean technology wasn't just about energy, but also about navigation and mapping. In this version, Atlantis was a global maritime power with advanced ships and instruments. They supposedly charted coastlines long before other known civilizations had the ability or need to do so. Some fringe researchers point to later anomalies, like early modern maps that seem to show surprisingly accurate coastlines of parts of the Americas or Antarctica, and suggest that these cartographers were copying down much older source material. Atlantean maps passed down through secret channels. Again, hard proof is absent here. The maps that exist can be explained through a combination of educated guesswork, copying from slightly better earlier charts, and occasional coincidence, but when laid alongside the Atlantis narrative, they add fuel to the speculation. The most extreme claims go even further down the rabbit hole. Anti-gravity, sonic levitation of stone, genetic engineering, even interactions with non-human intelligence. Atlantis was Area 51 before Area 51. These ideas go well beyond anything supported by archaeology or physics and are not taken seriously in academic circles, yet they continue to attach themselves to Atlantis because the story itself is a blank canvas. A single destroyed island can be made to hold almost any technology you can imagine, precisely because there's nothing left to check it against. The ocean is deep. The ruins, if they ever existed, would be submerged, eroded, and buried under sediment. The absence of evidence becomes part of the mystique. So where does that leave us? On one side, we have Plato's text, the geological record, and the ruins of real Bronze Age civilizations that were advanced for their time and then shattered by natural forces. On the other hand, we have a towering mythology of lost technology and global influence, floating under a sea of speculation. There is, at present, no recovered device, no Atlantean artifact that clearly demonstrates a level of engineering beyond what we already know from Egypt, Mesopotamia, or the Indus Valley. But the allure of a civilization before civilization is so powerful. It speaks to a deep human suspicion that we might not be the first to climb this high, that our own story might be more cynical and more fragile than we'd like to admit. But as we move through the rest of this episode, into the Great Pyramids, through the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, and into that mystery of ancient maps, you'll start to see a pattern. We're encountering structures, alignments, and anomalies that feel just a little out of place. And in that feeling, that subtle dissonance between what we're told's possible and what we're actually seeing, the myth of Atlantis continues to breathe. Now, if Atlantis is a ghost story hanging over the ocean, the Great Pyramids are the exact opposite. Solid, immovable, right in front of us. You can stand in the sand and look up at them, touch the stone with your own hands. There's no question that they're real. No debate about whether somebody at some point built them. Yet, when you look closely at what it would have taken to raise millions of stone blocks into the sky more than 4,000 years ago, the line between what we can comfortably explain and what still feels off starts to blur. If Atlantis is the myth of a lost ancient civilization, the pyramids are the test case. A real monument we can measure against that idea. So let's leave the drowned island behind for a moment and walk inland, along the Nile, to the Giza Plateau. The three main pyramids in Giza, those of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, were built during Egypt's Old Kingdom, roughly between 2600 and 2500 BCE. The largest, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, originally stood around 146 meters tall. Its sides sheathed in polished Tura limestone that would have gleamed in the sun. Today, weathering and quarrying has stripped away most of the casing stones, but the core remains. A mountain of roughly 2.3 million stone blocks with an estimated total mass of around 6 million tons. Mainstream Egyptology dates the Great Pyramids to the reign of the pharaoh Khufu, around 2580 to 2560 BCE. Based on multiple lines of evidence, quarry marks with Khufu's name have been found in hidden chambers near the top of the structures. Nearby, the workers' village, with bakeries, barracks, and tools, tells a story of a large organized labor force. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from the area supports the time frame. In this view, the pyramid is the culmination of generations of experimentation. Earlier, smaller pyramids nearby show trial and error paths that led to the Great Pyramids of Giza. The conventional explanation for how the pyramid was built goes roughly like this. Teams of skilled workers, seasonal laborers, and slaves cut limestone blocks at local quarries, dragged them on sledges over prepared tracks, and hauled them up ramps into position. Copper chisels, stone hammers, and wooden levers did most of the cutting and shaping. Lubricated sledges sliding over wet sand reduced friction. With enough time, enough manpower, and a strong centralized state directing resources, you can accumulate a lot of stone in one place. Experimental archaeologists have tried to replicate pieces of this process. Small teams have demonstrated that with a relatively modest number of laborers, you can move multi-ton blocks short distances with simple tools. Studies have shown that wetting sand in front of the sledge can indeed make it easier to pull a heavy load. On paper, a workforce of tens of thousands over 2 decades or so can account for the number of stones placed, especially when you consider that not every block is gigantic. Many are of manageable size. That's the standard model. No lasers, no anti-gravity, no forgotten machines. Just organization, sweat, and time. And yet, within that explanation, there are details that refuse to sit quietly. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of a few arc minutes. Its base deviates from a perfect square by only a few centimeters. The difference in length between its longest and shortest side is less than the width of a human hand. The foundation is astonishingly level despite being laid on bedrock that wasn't naturally flat. Inside, the king's chamber is constructed from massive granite blocks hauled from Aswan, more than 800 kilometers away, and some of those beams weigh 40 to 60 tons. Mainstream researchers have proposed reasonable methods to achieve these feats. Careful surveying with sight tools, plumb bobs, water-filled trenches used as levels, incremental correction as each course was laid. None of this requires modern technology. When you stand in the narrow passages, and when you imagine the logistics of hauling 60-ton beams up the pyramid and then lowering them into place with near-perfect fit, it starts to feel less like a simple engineering project and more like something on the edge of what a Bronze Age society should be able to do. This is the crack the impossible construction narrative pours into. In the alternative view, the pyramids are not just royal tombs, and Old Kingdom Egyptians were not working alone. The precision of the alignments, the scale of the project, and the apparent lack of intermediate structures that match are taken as a sign of something else at work. Either a level of technological knowledge that have not been fully credited to the Egyptians, or the influence of an older forgotten civilization, something very much like Atlantis. Proponents of this idea point to a number of details. The pyramid's base, if you take the perimeter and divide it by twice its height, yields a number close to pi. The ratio of the pyramid's height and the radius of a circle with the same circumference at its base is approximately 2 pi. They argue that this encodes advanced mathematical constraints, implying a sophisticated understanding of geometry, perhaps even knowledge of the size of the Earth. Others highlight the way the 3 main pyramids at Giza echo the pattern of the 3 stars in Orion's belt, suggesting an intentional astral alignment that ties these monuments to the sky. From a conventional standpoint, some of these correspondence can be explained as coincidental or the result of trial and error guided by practical concerns. Stable angles for masonry, aesthetic preferences, and rough empirical math that just happens to brush up against familiar constraints. But once you start stacking these coincidences together, the alternative narrative grows stronger for people already inclined to suspect a deeper pattern. Then there's the stone itself. Some blocks are jointed with such tight seams that it's difficult to slip a razor blade between them. In other ancient sites, like the megalithic walls of Peru, you see irregular, multi-sided stones that interlock with uncanny precision. While those aren't pyramids, they often enter the same conversation. How, with supposedly primitive tools, are these fits achieved? Mainstream answers involve patience, abrasions, and the fact that labor was cheap and time was abundant. Fringe theories propose something else. Advanced cutting tools, unknown techniques for softening stones, or even vibrational methods for shaping a moving rock. A more restrained version of the impossible construction argument doesn't claim aliens or magic, it simply suggests that the Old Kingdom Egyptians, the ones who taught them, may have had a level of practical engineering and scientific understanding that we haven't fully recognized. They might have known more about astronomy, surveying, and materials than we've given them credit for, because those skills were transmitted verbally through guilds and priesthoods rather than written in a way that survived. In that interpretation, the pyramids aren't evidence of non-human intervention, but as a human peak we've underestimated. The more radicalized view, of course, ties the pyramids directly to a lost advanced civilization. In that story, Giza is built by survivors of a cataclysm like the supposed Athenian disaster, or constructed on top of far older foundations. The precise alignments, the use of granite and resonant chambers, and the sheer mass of stones are taken as hints that the pyramids were not tombs at all, but machines, energy devices, initiation structures, or repositories of encoded knowledge. Some point to the so-called air shafts leading out of the king's chamber, aligning with certain stars around 2500 BCE. They use that as evidence of a cosmically tuned design far beyond simple functionary architecture. The evidence for such claims is, at best, circumstantial. There's no preserved machines, no blueprints etched into the walls saying this is a power plant, and the burial equipment in the funerary text found in pyramids support a more conventional religious function. But the feeling that something more is going on here doesn't go away easily, especially when you consider that even with all of our cranes, models, and computers, we haven't built quite anything like the Great Pyramid today. Not because we can't, but because the cost and effort would be enormous. In the end, the pyramids sit as an uncomfortable intersection of what we can explain and what still feels barely plausible. On one hand, the mainstream story holds together. A wealthy centralized state marshals tens of thousands of workers over decades using simple tools and clever techniques to build monuments to its rulers and its gods. On the other, the precision, the scale, and the faint mathematical and astronomical echoes baked into the stone invite a more provocative question. Were they working entirely alone at the very beginning of the human story, or were they standing on the shoulders of something older? We don't have to pick a side completely. It's possible that both are true in different ways. That the Egyptians, with no help from aliens or mythical continents, achieved something astonishing with the tools they had. And that, at the same time, they inherited fragments of knowledge, rules of thumb, and sacred proportions from cultures whose own monuments had not survived as well. The pyramids, in that sense, become less of an anomaly and more of a lighthouse marking the edge of our known history. As we move deeper into this investigation, we'll follow the edges further back in time, to places like Göbekli Tepe, a site that predates the pyramids by thousands of years, yet shows complex architecture and symbolism at a moment when, by all accounts, humans were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. If the Great Pyramid is the crown of the known ancient world, Göbekli Tepe is the crack beneath the floor, and it raises some unsettling questions. Just how many times have we climbed this hill before? Göbekli Tepe doesn't tower over a river valley or sit at the heart of a known empire. It's a low, dusty mound in southeastern Turkey, on a ridge overlooking plains, and for a long time, people walked right past it, assuming it was just another hill. Then archaeologists started to dig. And what they found didn't fit the story we've been telling ourselves. Under the soil, arranged in circular enclosures, stood T-shaped stone pillars, some weighing up to 10 or even 20 tons. Many of these pillars are carved in high relief, with animals, snakes, boars, foxes, birds, scorpions, and abstract symbols carved into them. Some have stylized human arms and hands, as if the pillars themselves are humanoid figures. These aren't rough stones dragged into place as a crude fence. They're shaped, decorated, and carefully aligned. The site has multiple layers, suggesting it was used, modified, and then finally buried over many centuries. The shock isn't just what Göbekli Tepe is, but when it is. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from the site places its earliest construction 9600 BCE, with active use stretching through at least 8000 BCE. This means people were gathering here, quarrying, carving, and raising multi-ton stones thousands of years before pyramids, thousands of years before Stonehenge, and according to the traditional model, before the invention of architecture and settled village life in this region. In the standard timeline, 9600 BCE is at the tail end of the last ice age. Human groups in this area are supposed to be small, mobile bands of nomadic hunter-gatherers. No cities, no organized religion in any complex sense, and no monumental architecture because they're just trying to survive. Göbekli Tepe breaks that model, and it suggests that people capable of building something sophisticated, symbolically rich, and logistically demanding existed long before we thought large-scale building projects were possible. It may even flip one of archaeology's core assumptions, that large settled communities and agriculture come first, and then religion and monuments followed. At Göbekli Tepe, it looks like the need to gather around a sacred site might have come first, pulling people into more permanent patterns of cooperation that eventually made farming in villages worthwhile. Mainstream archaeologists see it as a game changer, but not a supernatural one. To them, Göbekli Tepe proves that hunter-gatherers were more socially and intellectually complex than we give them credit for, that they had the numbers, the organization, and the tools to coordinate big projects when they had strong enough reason. They didn't need metal tools, writing, or a king to move 10-ton stones. They needed time, shared belief, and a knowledge of quarrying and leverage that we hadn't expected at that date. Even so, the site opens the door to more speculative thinking because of its timing. Around 12,800 years ago, just before the earliest phases of Göbekli Tepe, the Earth went through a sudden climatic shift known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures in many regions plunged back toward Ice Age conditions, then around 1200 years later, swung back to warmth. Some researchers, especially in the alternative history world, argue that this event may have been triggered by a cosmic impact. Fragments of a comet striking the ice sheets, causing massive meltwater floods and global chaos. In that view, Göbekli Tepe rises on the other side of a planetary catastrophe, standing almost exactly at the moment when the world stabilizes again. To those leaning toward a lost civilization narrative, that timing is not a coincidence. They suggest that Göbekli Tepe might be a memorial or a reboot, a project undertaken by survivors or descendants of a more advanced pre-Ice Age culture. The builders in this story are no longer pure hunter-gatherers discovering architecture for the first time, but people carrying dim, fragmented memories of something older. Myths of stars, sacred alignments, symbolic systems that don't just appear out of nowhere. The deliberate burial of the site, because Göbekli Tepe seems to have been intentionally covered up rather than slowly abandoned, is then read as another clue, a ritual closing of a chapter, or the deliberate attempt to hide and preserve something. From a strict archaeological standpoint, that's a leap too far. There's no direct evidence of an earlier global high-tech society feeding knowledge into Göbekli Tepe. That the tools found are stone and the remains are animal bones, not metal gears. The carvings, while intricate, are within the range of what skilled craftspeople could do with flint and time. The intentional burial could be a religious act, a way to decommission a sacred space before moving on to another. In the grounded reading, Göbekli Tepe doesn't prove Atlantis, it proves our civilization timeline has been too neat and condescending. But even with that grounded frame, the implications are unsettling. If people 11,000 to 12,000 years ago could organize large building projects, carve detailed iconography, and maintain a ritual center for centuries, what else were they doing that we hadn't found yet? How many other sites from that age are still buried under meters of settlement or drowned on continental shelves after Ice Age glaciers melted? Our maps of early civilizations are based on what we've happened to uncover on the tiny fractions of Earth's surface we've carefully examined. Göbekli Tepe is a reminder that the sample size is small and the story we tell from it might be incomplete. So when we talk about civilization timelines, the neat progression from simple bands to villages to city-states to empires, Göbekli Tepe forces us to admit that reality may have been messier. Advanced organizations can appear earlier. Monumental ideas can emerge long before cities. Peaks of knowledge can rise in places and in times we didn't expect, and then vanish, leaving only a few stubborn stones behind. If that can happen once, in the windswept hills of Turkey, how many other peaks might have come and gone? How many are erased by rising seas, shifting rivers, or simple neglect? In that uncertainty, the idea of an earlier, partially forgotten chapter of human history, something like a real-world Atlantis, starts to feel less impossible, even if the evidence we have is only suggestive. In the next step of this investigation, we'll zoom out from single sites and look at the planet itself. Ancient shorelines, Ice Age coastlines now underwater, and strange hints in old maps that suggest somebody at some point might have known more about the shape of the world than we think they should have. When you zoom out from sites like Giza or Göbekli Tepe and look at the whole planet, another piece of the civilization before civilization puzzle appears in a place you wouldn't expect. Old paper. Ancient and early modern maps are, on the surface, just practical tools. Charts for sailors, references for kings, but some of them contain details that seem too accurate, too early. And in the alternative history world, a handful of these maps are treated almost like a crime scene photo. Blurry, partial, but hinting that someone somewhere else knew more than they ever should have. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map. In 1929, a fragment of a world map was rediscovered at a palace in Istanbul. It had been drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. At first glance, it looked like a typical early 16th century chart of the Atlantic, parts of Europe and Africa on the right, and a jagged coastline of the Americas on the left. But there are a few strange things about it. Piri Reis wrote notes in the margins, explaining that he compiled his map using about 20 source charts. Some were Portuguese, some were Arabic, and at least one, he claimed, went back to the time of Alexander the Two-Horned, often interpreted as Alexander the Great in other words. He believed he was copying from older material. The coastline of the South African part of the map is surprisingly good for the time. Some sections seem almost too accurate in terms of general shape and orientation, especially considering that Europeans had only been exploring these coasts for a few decades. Even stranger, on the southern edge of the map between South Africa, some researchers argue there appears to be a landmass resembling the northern coast of Antarctica, supposedly drawn before Antarctica was ever officially discovered in 1820. This is where the speculation begins to snowball. In the alternative narrative, Piri Reis and other cartographers weren't geniuses at guessing a coastline. They were inheriting fragments of far older global maps, copies of copies of copies, tracing back to a time when a seafaring civilization had already explored the world, including Antarctica, when it was free of ice. This idea ties directly into the lost advanced civilization hypothesis. If somebody was charting an ice-free Antarctica, then we're talking about a society operating more than 6,000 years ago, before the ice sheets fully locked in. That would push serious navigation and possible global trade back into the late Ice Age or earlier. The Piri Reis map isn't the only one in this story. There are other charts from the time period which show a southern continent with oddly detailed coastlines or international seas that some have claimed resemble modern surveys of Antarctica under the ice. The pattern in this view is that European mapmakers were piecing together a shattered inheritance, ancient knowledge slipping through in warped medieval and Renaissance forms. Mainstream cartographers and historians are far more cautious. To them, Antarctica on these maps is likely a mix of miscopied coastlines. Mythical Terra Australis, the imagined great southern continent that many scholars believed must exist to balance the land masses in the north, and a simple error. When you overlay the Piri Reis map onto modern projections, the supposed match to Antarctica falls apart under precise scrutiny. Distortions and artistic liberties do a lot of the work. The accurate South American coast can be explained by Portuguese exploration and secret charts that would have been circulating among navigators, not time-traveling Atlantean data. And the idea of these maps showing ice-free coastlines is undercut by glaciology that tells us that Antarctica has been locked under ice for hundreds of thousands of years, long before Homo sapiens were mapping anything. Still, even in the conservative reading, there's something more intriguing. Buried under the margins of these maps, the clear admission that some of the source charts were older or of unknown origin and highly valued. Medieval and early mapmakers did have access to lost or now vanished geographic knowledge, passed down through empires and libraries that no longer exist. Alexandria burned, libraries rotted, charts were copied by hand till the originals fell apart. It doesn't take Atlantis to imagine that a surprising amount of early survey and coastal knowledge might have disappeared, leaving only faint echoes in a few surviving documents. So once again, we're left in a familiar place. On one side, a grounded explanation. Educated guesses, exploration, copying older but still human-made charts, and a big helping of wishful thinking about a southern continent that wasn't really known yet. On the other side, a more drastic possibility. That some of these maps preserve shattered pieces of a global picture drawn by hands we don't remember. What makes this compelling isn't that the evidence proves a lost civilization. It doesn't. It's that, when often combined with places like Göbekli Tepe and monuments like the Great Pyramids, these oddities keep pushing at the edges of our timeline. They suggest that human beings, or whoever was teaching them, may have been organizing, building, and exploring at levels we haven't fully accounted for. And if that's true, even in a small way, then we've only been reading the last few chapters of a much older book. From here, we're going to pull these threads together. The drowned continents, the impossible stones, and the out-of-date places, and ask the question directly. If there was a civilization before our civilization, what could have happened to it, and what would it mean for us now? We've talked about ancient maps and Antarctica in terms of genuine mystery and odd historical claims, but there's another idea that orbits all of this, one that lives more in the realm of internet conspiracy than archaeology or history. To be responsible here and to keep this firmly within the examining fringe beliefs category, we need to acknowledge it, label it clearly for what it is, and move on. That's the so-called ice wall theory. In its most familiar form, this shows up in the modern flat Earth communities. The basic claim goes like this. Antarctica is not a continent on the bottom of the globe. Instead, they say it's a massive ring of ice encircling the entire known world. A kind of frozen barrier that keeps the oceans from spilling over the edge of a flat Earth. According to this idea, the Antarctic ice wall is thousands of miles long, impossibly high, and heavily guarded. Governments, space agencies, and scientists are all allegedly conspiring to keep people from getting close enough to see the truth. From there, the story gets even more speculative. Secret lands beyond the wall, hidden resources, or even entire unknown civilizations locked behind the ice. In some versions, this gets woven back into the lost civilizations idea, suggesting that remnants of a pre-cataclysmic culture might exist out past this barrier, deliberately concealed from the rest of humanity. It's important to be absolutely clear. This is not supported by any credible evidence. We have satellite imagery, circumnavigation records, flights, research stations, and on-the-ground expeditions that map Antarctica as a continent at the southern pole of a roughly spherical-shaped Earth. People have crossed it, skied to the South Pole, and worked at dozens of scientific bases along its coast and deep in its interior. The towering ice cliffs you see in photos are sections of the ice sheet or ice shelves when the ice melts into the sea, not really the edge of reality. The idea of a secret, militarized ice wall keeping the public away doesn't hold up either. There are strict environmental regulations under the Atlantic Treaty System, but tourism exists. Scientific cooperation is extensive, and the restrictions are about protecting a fragile ecosystem, not hiding a cosmic boundary. You can quite literally buy a ticket on a cruise ship and go see parts of Antarctica for yourself. So why mention this at all? Because it shows how powerful our fascination with the unknown can be. Once you accept the possibility that there might be gaps in our understanding of the past, lost chapters, missing sites, underestimated cultures, it becomes very easy for some people to leap from "we don't know everything" to "nothing we're told is real." And that is a huge difference. In this episode, we're walking a narrow ridge, exploring legitimate archaeological puzzles and historic oddities, while also brushing up against stories that live out on the speculative fringe. The ice wall is a good example of the far edge, a theory that says more about our modern distrust and mythology than about the actual planet we live on. So, if you reflect, keep that distinction in mind. There are genuine mysteries worth investigating, with evidence and open questions. And then there are ideas like the endless Antarctic ice wall. Fascinating folklore, useful as a window into how people think, but firmly outside the realm of supported science. And all of these stories have some sort of factual bias behind them. All of these locations exist or are alleged to have existed throughout history. No matter what, they all seem to exist out here, on the other side. The nature of reality is a question that has persisted as long as human consciousness itself. Before we had the language of computer science, we had the language of philosophy and myth. 2,500 years ago, Plato described a cave where prisoners were chained facing a blank wall. They watched shadows projected by a fire behind them and believed those shadows were the only reality. They could not turn their heads to see the source of the projection. They accepted the illusion because it was the only data they had. In the 17th century, Descartes posed a similar problem with his evil demon thought experiment. He asked, how can one be certain that an external entity isn't deceiving their senses? That the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all external things aren't merely delusions of dreams. For millennia, this was purely a philosophical debate. But in the last 40 years, the conversation has shifted from philosophy to physics. As our own technology has advanced, as we have built virtual worlds, neural networks, and artificial intelligences, we've begun to recognize patterns in our own universe that look suspiciously familiar. We have begun to ask if the shadows on the wall are actually pixels on a screen. This is the simulation hypothesis, the proposal that our known universe is not base reality, but a sophisticated digital construct. If the universe were a simulation, it would require limits. A computer, no matter how powerful, has finite processing power. To run a simulation of this magnitude, the system would need to optimize its resources. When physicists examine the fundamental laws of the universe, they find specific hard limits that function remarkably like the constraints of a computer processor. The first of these is the Planck length. In classic geometry, space is continuous. You can divide a line infinitely and it will always be a line. However, in our physical universe, this is not the case. There's a minimum unit of length, 1.6 times 10 to the power of negative 35 meters. Below this scale, the concepts of size and distance cease to have meaning. Space is not smooth, it's granular. It's composed of discrete units. In digital imaging, we call this a pixel. The universe appears to have a maximum resolution, suggesting it's a grid-based environment rather than a continuous organic one. Then there's the speed limit of the cosmos, the speed of light. In a vacuum, light travels at approximately 299,792 kilometers per second. It's a rigid, unbreakable constant. In the context of a simulation, this functions less like a speed and more like a latency limit, the maximum rate at which information can be transmitted across the network of the simulation. If an event happens at one end of the galaxy, the information of that event cannot reach the other side instantly. The system requires time to propagate that data. Perhaps the most compelling argument for a simulated reality lies in theoretical physics and supersymmetry by Dr. S. James Gate, Jr., a theoretical physicist who discovered something particular while studying the equations of string theory. This real-life Sheldon Cooper found embedded within the fundamental mathematics that describe the nature of our reality a error-correcting code. These were not random sequences, and they were indistinguishable from block linear self-adaptive coding, the exact type of code used by search engines and browsers to manage data transmissions and correct errors in digital streams. He basically found computer code written into the fabric of the cosmos. Furthermore, the behavior of matter at a quantum level mirrors the optimization techniques used in modern video game rendering. In a video game, the engine does not render the interior of a building until the player enters it. It saves processing power by only drawing what's being observed. The double-slit experiment demonstrates a similar phenomenon in our reality. Subatomic particles like electrons exist as a wave of probability, a cloud of potential locations, until they're measured. Only when observed do they collapse into a single position. The universe appears to render reality only when being looked at. These anomalies suggest that what we perceive as solid matter is actually information processing. The physics of our world are the operating system, and like any operating system, it occasionally exhibits glitches. If our reality is indeed a constructed simulation, we should expect to see evidence of efficiency in its design. A programmer does not manually place every leaf on a tree or every jagged edge on a coastline. Instead, they use procedural generation, simple mathematical algorithms that automatically generate complex, non-repeating patterns. When we look at the biological and geological structures in the world, we find this kind of algorithmic underpinning. This is most visible in the prevalence of the golden ratio, or phi, approximately 1.618. This irrational number appears with startling frequency in the natural world. It dictates the spiral arrangements of seeds in a sunflower, the curve of a nautilus shell, the proportions of the human body, and even the spiral arms of galaxies. The golden ratio functions as a growth algorithm, a single line of code that allows for maximum efficiency in packing and structural integrity without the need for manual design. To a simulation theorist, the golden ratio is not just a beautiful coincidence. It's a reoccurring asset file, a fundamental texture used repeatedly across the entire map of the universe. We see similar efficiency in fractals, complex geometric shapes that look the same at any scale. A coastline viewed from a satellite looks jagged. Zoom in to 100 meters and the jaggedness remains similar. Zoom in to a single rock and the pattern persists. This property, known as self-similarity, is a cornerstone of computer graphics used to generate terrain and clouds with minimal data. The universe seems to be built on these simple iterative rules that generate a vast complexity from minimum input, exactly how a sophisticated simulation would optimize its memory usage. Beyond the visual, there's the issues of the parameters themselves. Physicists have identified roughly 26 fundamental physical constraints, fixed numerical values that define how our universe operates. These include the strength of gravity, the mass of an electron, and the cosmological constant. What is unsettling to physicists is that these numbers appear to be arbitrarily tuned to allow for the existence of matter and life. Consider the cosmological constant, which governs the energy density of empty space. Its value is an incredibly small 0, followed by over 100 decimal places before a significant digit. If this value were slightly larger, the universe would have expanded too rapidly for stars and galaxies to form. If it were slightly smaller, the universe would have collapsed back on itself explicitly after the Big Bang. The odds of this value occurring by chance are astronomically low, often compared to hitting a target 1 inch wide from on the other side of the observable universe. In a simulation context, these are not random accidents, they are settings. They are the configuration variables entered by the designer to ensure simulations remain stable and functional. Finally, we must address the phenomenon Albert Einstein famously dismissed as spooky action at a distance: quantum entanglement. This occurs when two particles interact and become linked, such that the state of one instantly determines the state of the other, no matter how far apart they are. If you measured one entangled particle on Earth, its partner, which could be located in a distant galaxy, will instantly assume the corresponding state. This interaction happens faster than the speed of light, violating the principle of local realism. In the physical world, this instant communication is baffling. It suggests that space is not real in the way we think it is. However, in the context of computer science, it's easily explained. In a program, the distance between two objects on the screen is irrelevant to the computer's memory. If two in-game objects share the same variable class or memory address, changing one changes the other instantly because they're not truly separate. They are just two different projections of the same underlying data. Quantum entanglement may simply be the universe revealing its data structure, showing us that despite the illusion of vast distances, everything is running on the same processor. If the physical laws of the universe represent the operating system's hardware constraints, then history represents its database. In a stable reality, the past should be immutable, unchanging. A recorded event is a fixed data point. However, in a simulated environment, data is subject to revision. Updates, patches, and file merges can alter existing records. When these alterations occur, they often leave behind artifacts, mismatches between current databases of reality and the local cache of human memory. We call this phenomenon the Mandela effect. This term was coined by a researcher named Fiona Broom in 2009, following a discussion at DragonCon where she discovered she was not alone in a specific vivid memory: the death of South African leader Nelson Mandela in prison during the 1960s. The memory was not vague. Those who shared it recalled specific details: a televised funeral, riots in the streets, and a moving speech by his widow. In this timeline, the current base reality, none of this occurred. Mandela was released from prison in the 1990s, served as president, and lived until 2013. The discrepancy suggests that thousands of unconnected individuals possess a shared memory of a deleted timeline. While skeptics attribute this to confabulation, the brain's tendency to fill in memory gaps with plausible fiction, the phenomenon is distinguished by its consistency. It is not that people remember differently, it's that they remember the same wrong details. Consider the case of the Berenstain Bears, a popular series of children's books that I grew up reading myself. A significant portion of the population, including me, remembers spelling it as Berenstein, ending in EIN as Berenstain. The spelling aligns with common German surnames. However, in our current reality, the name has always been Berenstain, with an AIN at the end. There is no record of a name change. Yet many claim to have a distinct visual memory of the Eon book covers or VHS tapes. In simulation theory, this is often compared to the find and replace error. A minor text asset that's been updated in the code, but the update failed to override memories stored in the user database. Perhaps the most visually complex example involves the logo for the apparel company Fruit of the Loom. The current logo is a collection of fruit, an apple, leaves, green grapes, and purple grapes. However, millions of people distinctly remember a cornucopia, a woven brown basket sitting behind the fruit. They recall learning the word cornucopia specifically because of this logo, or the Hunger Games. The company asserts that the cornucopia has never been part of their branding in their entire corporate history. If this is a simple memory error, it's statistically impossible that millions would hallucinate the exact same complex object, a wicker basket, in the exact same position. Then there's the anomaly of the film Shazam. A massive cohort of people born in the 1980s and 90s remember a movie featuring the comedian Sinbad playing a genie. They recall the poster, the purple outfit, the specific plot points, but no such film exists in this reality. There is a film called Kazam starring Shaquille O'Neal, but those who remember the Sinbad film insist they are distinctly different productions. This resembles a deleted asset file, a file that was removed from the directory but whose references remain in the system index. Those discrepancies lead to the concept of residue. In a simulation, when a file is changed, sometimes fragments of the old version remain. We see this in reality where third-party references contradict the source material. For example, there are newspaper clippings from the past that misspell Berenstain as Berenstein, or full parodies of the Fruit of the Loom logo that include a cornucopia. These are secondary files that the simulation's update failed to catch, according to theorists. Theoretical physicists interacting with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics offer a mechanism for this. They propose we exist in a multiverse of infinite branching possibilities. Every time a quantum event has multiple possible outcomes, the universe splits. If these parallel timelines are close enough in frequency, they may occasionally merge or overlap. The Mandela effect may not be false memory, but rather the result of consciousness sliding between extremely similar simulation instances. You remember the cornucopia because you originated in a timeline where the artist drew the basket. You are now residing in a timeline where they did not. The code has been merged, but your internal log files remain from the previous version. In computer science, this is known as a merge conflict. When two versions of code are combined, the system must decide which version is the master. The reality we see around us is the master file. The memories we hold on to are the depreciated code, just waiting to be overwritten. Now, if the universe is a simulation, we must also identify the user. We must distinguish between the programmed environment and the conscious observer experiencing it. This leads us to the most difficult question in philosophy and neuroscience, the hard problem of consciousness. The term defined by philosophist David Chalmers separates the easy problems of life, how the brain processes heat, how it integrates information, how it controls behavior, from the hard problem. Why does any of this feel like something? Why do we have an internal movie playing in our heads? A sophisticated computer can detect the wavelength of the color red. It can react to it. It can say the word red, but it does not experience redness. This internal subjective experience is known as qualia, and in a materialistic worldview, qualia is unnecessary. A biological robot could survive and reproduce perfectly well without it. The fact that we have this internal experience suggests that our consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain, but an input from somewhere else. This brings us to the concept of the philosophical zombie, or P-zombie. This is a hypothetical being that is physically identical to a human. It screams if you pinch it, it laughs at jokes, it discusses philosophy. But inside, there is no one home. It is a biological machine executing complex scripts without any internal experience. Philosophers use this to argue that consciousness is not separate from physical matter. Simulation theorists use it to argue for the existence of a non-player character, or NPCs. In a video game, the world is populated by hundreds of characters. They walk, talk, and react to the player. However, the computer does not generate a consciousness for them. They are walking processes, simple loops of code designed to create the illusion of a populated world. They are P-zombies. If our universe is a simulation with finite processing power, it would be remarkably inefficient to simulate a complex high-fidelity consciousness for 8 billion distinct entities. It is far more likely that the simulation utilizes level of detail processing for minds, just as it does for graphics. This suggests the unsettling possibility that not everyone you meet is real in the same way you are. The vast majority of the population could be empty scripts, running on autopilot to maintain the immersion of the simulation for the true observers. They are consistent, they have backstories, but they possess no internal light. They exist only when they interact with a player. This aligns with the philosophical nightmare of solipsism, the idea that you are the only mind that is sure to exist. Descartes famously concluded, "I think, therefore I am." And this is the only certainty you have. You cannot prove your family, your friends, or even me as the narrator of this video possess consciousness. You can only verify their behavior, never their experience. In a single-player simulation, you are the only true variable. Everything else is environment. However, there is an alternative to the single-player model, the massively multiplayer online framework. In this scenario, multiple distinct consciousnesses inhabit the simulation simultaneously. This requires an interface. If the simulation hypothesis is true, your body is not you. Your body is an avatar, a rig. Your brain is not the source of your consciousness, it's just the receiver. The same way a radio picks up a signal from a distant tower, the brain picks up the signal of consciousness from outside the simulation. This explains why we were bound by the laws of physics only until we look closely. The avatar must follow the rules of the game engine, gravity, thermodynamics, mortality. But the consciousness driving the avatar exists on a server outside of this reality, unconstrained by these limits. This is why we have dreams, intuition, and out-of-body experiences. These are the moments where the connection between the user and the avatar glitch, and for a split second, we see the interface instead of the game. If we accept that the body is a mere controller, the purpose of the simulation becomes clearer. It is not a prison, it's a training ground. A sandbox environment designed to subject consciousness to limitations it does not experience in base reality. We are here specifically because this reality has consequences, scarcity, and linearity, features that may not exist in the realm where our code originated from. If we accept the premises that our physics are code, our history is editable, and our bodies are merely avatars, we are left with the final, most terrifying question. Why? Why build a universe of suffering, entropy, and limitations? If we are the users, why would we choose to play this game? The answer may lie in the constraints themselves. In computer science, we use simulations to solve problems that cannot be solved in the abstract. You simulate a car crash to see how the metal bends. You simulate a pandemic to see how the virus spreads. You simulate economies to test for collapse. The value of the simulation is the struggle. The value is the data generated by stress. This mirrors the ancient Eastern philosophy of Maya, or illusion. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the physical world is described as a veil, a deceptive construct that hides the true nature of reality. The goal of the soul is not to win the game of the material world, to accumulate wealth or status, but to realize the game itself is not real, to wake up from the dream of samsara. It is a striking parallel. Ancient mystics spending lifetimes meditating to detach their consciousness from their physical avatars, effectively trying to access the deeper console of the universe. The Gnostics, an early mystical sect, took this a step further. They believed the material world was a mistake, a false reality created not by the true God, but by a lesser flawed deity. To the Gnostics, this world was a prison designed to trap the divine spark of light, our souls, in matter. Their theology was an escape plan. They believed through gnosis, secret knowledge or insight, that one could hack the system, bypass the people guarding the exit, and return to the true base reality of the simulation. Physicist Thomas Campbell, author of My Big Toe, offers a more optimistic yet cynical view. He suggests the universe is a consciousness trainer. We are here to lower the entropy of our consciousness, to move from chaos and fear toward order and love. The simulation provides the resistance necessary for growth. Just as you lift heavy weights to tear and rebuild muscle fibers, your consciousness enters this high-friction environment to face difficult choices. Every moral dilemma, every loss, every moment of pain is a feature, not a bug. It is the curriculum that teaches you. This reframes the entire human experience. If this is a simulation, then death is not the end of the user. It is simply the end of the session. The screen goes black, the stats are uploaded, and the headset comes off. The tragic finality we fear is merely a transition of data states. The memories you have, the love you felt, the lessons you learned, those are the save files that persist. But there is a danger in this line of thinking. If nothing is real, does anything matter? If these are just pixels, why care about the suffering of others? This is the trap of nihilism. But the simulation hypothesis argues the opposite. Because this is a closed system designed for interaction, your choices matter more, not less. In a game, every decision branches the narrative. Every action changes the state of the world. You are not a passive observer watching a movie. You're an active participant in a dataset that's being written in real time. No matter what you think by this point, we started this journey looking at shadows on the wall in Plato's cave. We have moved through the pixelated granularity of quantum mechanics, the glitching archives of our own history, and the eerie silence of a universe that might be populated by background processes. We have peered behind the curtain and found that the wizard is likely a mathematician. The evidence is circumstantial, yet cumulative. The math works too well. The physics are too optimized. The glitches are too specific. We are living in a reality that behaves exactly like a system designed to be observed. So what do you do with this information? You could try to break the game. Look for the seams. Hunt for the glitches. Test the boundaries of your reality. Or you could simply play it better. If you knew that every moment of your life was a level designed to test your character, how would you act differently today? If you knew the obstacles in your path were placed there procedurally to help you level up, would you still fear them? Perhaps the question isn't whether or not the simulation is real. The question is, knowing what you know now, are you going to stay asleep and let the simulation run on autopilot? Or are you ready to take the controller? no matter what your choice is. I'll see you on the other side.